Why are your eyes between my legs? Magnolia Hartwell's words exploded into the barn as she stared down at the rancher kneeling between her thighs, his hands gripping her exposed leg where her dress had ridden up during the fall. But Ezekiel Thornwood wasn't looking at her skin. His eyes were locked on the unmistakable curve of her belly, the secret that would get her run out of Wyoming territory before winter, the truth she'd killed to protect. The giant widow, 6 feet of raw-boned woman that Coldwater Creek called unnatural, had just collapsed trying to prove she was strong enough to survive alone, and now the one man in 3 counties who never spoke to anyone had his rough rancher's hands on her body, seeing what she'd been hiding beneath layers of fabric and lies. "Because I see something you've been hiding from everyone," Zeke rasped, and Magnolia's heart stopped, not from shame, but from the way his voice cracked, the way his fingers trembled against her leg like he'd just found something precious in the dirt. This was the lonely rancher who'd buried his pregnant wife and unborn child 3 years ago and hadn't smiled since. So why were his eyes filling with tears? Why was he looking at her growing belly like it was a miracle instead of a scandal? And why did his next words sound like a vow that would either save her life or burn them both alive? "And I'm not letting anyone take it from you." Magnolia tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The dizziness still had her in its grip, the hunger gnawing at her insides like a wild animal. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days because the bank was threatening to take her cabin, and every penny went toward keeping a roof over her head. The baby inside her didn't care about money or pride, though. It needed food, and her body was shutting down in protest. Zeke's hand stayed firm on her leg, not possessive, but steadying, like he was afraid if he let go, she'd shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Get your hands off me," she whispered, but there was no strength behind the words. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Zeke's voice dropped lower, more intimate, like they were the only 2 people left in the world. "You're 4, maybe 5 months along. You've been hiding it under loose dresses and staying away from town. But you can't hide it much longer, Magnolia, and when they find out, they'll call me a whore." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "They'll say the baby isn't Silas's, they'll run me out before the first snow and I'll die on the trail like so many others." Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of him. She'd cried enough alone in the dark. "So go ahead and tell them. Get it over with." Zeke's jaw tightened. "I'm not telling anyone anything." He slid his other hand beneath her shoulders and lifted her like she weighed nothing, carrying her toward a bale of hay. The ease with which he moved her, 6-foot frame made something crack open in her chest. No one had ever held her like this. No one had ever made her feel small in a way that felt safe instead of diminished. He set her down gently, then knelt again so they were eye to eye. "When's the last time you ate?" The question was so unexpected that Magnolia actually laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "What does that matter?" "It matters because you just fainted trying to lift a 20-pound feed sack." His eyes scanned her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "It matters because I can see your cheekbones cutting through your skin and your hands are shaking. It matters because that baby needs food even if you've given up on yourself." "I haven't given up," she shot back, but even she could hear the lie. "Yes, you have." Zeke stood and walked to his saddlebag, pulling out a cloth bundle. He returned and unwrapped it to reveal bread, cheese, dried meat, more food than she'd seen in a week. "Eat." Magnolia stared at the food like it might bite her. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity, it's basic human decency, which seems to be in short supply around here." He broke off a piece of bread and held it out. "Eat, Magnolia, or I'll sit here all day until you do." Pride and hunger warred inside her. Pride had kept her alive this long, kept her spine straight when the whole town whispered behind her back. But hunger was winning, and the baby. God, the baby deserved better than a mother too stubborn to accept help. Her hand shook as she reached for the bread. The moment it touched her tongue, tears spilled over. She couldn't stop them. Zeke watched her eat and said nothing, which somehow made it worse. Magnolia wanted him to gloat, to hold this moment over her head, to prove that accepting help meant surrendering her dignity. But he just sat there, in the hay-dusted barn with afternoon light slanting through the gaps in the wood, patient as stone, while she devoured bread and cheese like a starving animal. When she finally slowed down, when the desperate edge of hunger dulled enough for shame to creep back in, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and forced herself to meet his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because 3 years ago I wanted to die," Zeke said, his voice so quiet she almost missed it. "Sarah was gone. Our baby was gone. I had a loaded rifle and a bottle of whiskey, and I was maybe an hour away from using both. Then your husband showed up at my door with a pot of stew and didn't say a single word about the mess I was. Just set the food down, told me a man's got to eat even when he doesn't want to, and left. Came back the next day with more food, and the next, for 2 weeks straight until I could finally get out of bed without wanting to put a bullet in my head. Magnolia's breath caught. She'd never known Silas had done that. He'd never mentioned it, never asked for credit or thanks. Just quietly saved a stranger's life and went about his business like it was nothing. I loved my wife more than my own life, Zeke continued, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. When I lost her and our baby, I thought God was punishing me for something. Thought maybe I didn't deserve happiness, so I stopped trying, stopped talking to people, built walls so high nothing could get through. His eyes found hers again, and they were full of something raw and painful. Then I saw you fall, saw you trying so hard to be strong, to survive alone, to protect that baby. And something in me just woke up. Something I thought was dead. Zeke, she didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the fact that this lonely, broken man was offering her the same grace her husband had once offered him. You're not alone anymore, he said, and it sounded like a promise. I know we barely know each other. I know the town will talk, but I also know that baby inside you deserves a chance, and so do you. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to bring you food every day. I'm going to fix whatever needs fixing around your place. And when you're ready, if you're ready, we're going to figure out how to face this town together. They'll destroy you, Magnolia whispered. Your reputation, your business, everything. Why would you risk that for me? Zeke stood slowly, like his joints ached, like the weight of grief was still heavy on his shoulders. Because Sarah would have wanted me to. Because your husband saved my life when he didn't have to. And because when I look at you, I don't see someone who needs saving. I see someone worth fighting for. He picked up his hat from where it had fallen during her collapse. I'll be back tomorrow with more food. Lock your door tonight and don't try to lift anything heavy. He turned to leave, but Magnolia's voice stopped him. Zeke. He looked back and she forced the words out even though they hurt. Thank you. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. Get some rest, Magnolia. You're going to need your strength. Then he was gone, and she was alone in the barn with the taste of bread still on her tongue and the phantom warmth of his hands still on her skin. For the first time in 4 months, since Silas died, crushed under rock and timber, Magnolia Hartwell felt something besides fear. She felt hope, and that terrified her more than anything. The baby kicked, a tiny flutter like butterfly wings, and she pressed both hands to her belly. It's okay, she whispered to the life growing inside her. Maybe we're going to be okay. But that night, lying in her cold bed with winter wind howling through the gaps in the cabin walls, doubt crept back in. What if Zeke changed his mind? What if he was just being kind out of obligation and would disappear once the debt to Silas was paid? What if the town found out and turned on him the way they'd turned on her? She couldn't let him sacrifice everything for a woman and child that weren't even his. She couldn't be that selfish. But when dawn broke and she heard the sound of an axe splitting wood outside her cabin, when she looked through the window and saw Zeke already working in the frost-sharp morning air, something inside her chest cracked wide open. He'd come back. He'd actually come back. She opened the door and he looked up, sweat already dampening his shirt despite the cold. Morning, he said, like this was normal. Like showing up to chop wood for a widow he barely knew was just something men did. You didn't have to. I know. He drove the axe into another log and it split clean down the middle. But I wanted to. He nodded toward a basket on her porch. There's eggs and bacon in there. Real coffee too, not that chicory nonsense. Make yourself a proper breakfast. Magnolia's throat tightened. Zeke, I can't keep taking from you. You're not taking. I'm giving. There's a difference. He set down the axe and walked toward her, and the morning light caught the silver threading through his dark hair. Magnolia, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't obligation. This is me choosing to show up because I want to, because seeing you smile is worth more than anything I could possibly give you. I'm not smiling, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she realized her lips were trembling with the effort not to. Not yet, Zeke said softly, but you will. Over the next 3 weeks, Zeke became a constant in Magnolia's life. He never asked permission, never made a show of his help. He just appeared each morning like clockwork and worked until the sun began its descent behind the mountains. He fixed the sagging porch, patched the roof where rain had been seeping through, reinforced the chicken coop against coyotes. He brought food that he claimed was extra from his ranch, though Magnolia suspected he was buying it specifically for her. And slowly, painfully, she began to let him in. They fell into a rhythm that felt almost like friendship, though neither of them named it. She'd cook meals too large for one person and he'd stay to eat them. They'd sit on the newly repaired porch as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, talking about nothing and everything. He told her about growing up in Texas, about breaking his first horse at age 12, about the way Sarah used to sing while she cooked, and how the silence after she died nearly killed him. Magnolia told him about Philadelphia, about growing up too tall in a world that wanted women small and quiet, about how Silas's letter had felt like a miracle because he'd written, "I don't care if you're 6 feet or 7, I just want a partner who's not afraid of hard work." "He sounds like he was a good man," Zeke said one evening, whittling a piece of wood into something that might become a spoon. He was. Magnolia's hand moved to her belly in that protective gesture that was becoming second nature. "I wish he could have known about the baby. Wish he could have seen." She trailed off, but Zeke understood. "He knows," he said quietly. "Wherever he is, he knows. And he'd be proud of how hard you're fighting." The words broke something loose inside her. "I'm so scared, Zeke." It was the first time she'd admitted it out loud. "What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this alone? What if—" "You're not alone." Zeke set down his whittling and turned to face her fully. "I know you're used to carrying everything yourself. I know you've had to be strong because nobody else would be strong for you. But Magnolia, you don't have to do that anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But trust was a luxury she'd learned not to afford. "You say that now. But when winter comes and the town starts talking more, when people start asking questions you don't want to answer, let them ask." There was steel in his voice now. "Let them talk. I stopped caring what this town thought of me the day I buried my wife. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." Magnolia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Why? Why do you care so much about what I think?" Zeke was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers in the fading light. "Because somewhere between fixing your fence and sitting on this porch, I started feeling alive again, and I can't—" His voice caught. "I can't go back to that emptiness, not now that I know what it feels like to have something to wake up for." The air between them felt charged, heavy with words neither of them was quite brave enough to say. Magnolia's breath came shallow and quick. "Zeke, I'm carrying another man's child. I'm broke. The whole town thinks I'm cursed. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough that she could smell leather and wood smoke on his skin. "I want you. Not despite everything you've been through, but because of who you've become because of it. You're brave and stubborn and so damn strong it makes my chest hurt just watching you. And yes, you're carrying Silas's child. But if you'll let me, I'll love that baby like it's mine. I'll give it my name, my home, my protection. I'll give it everything I couldn't give the child I lost." Tears spilled down Magnolia's cheeks. "You're asking me to marry you." "I'm begging you to marry me," Zeke corrected, his voice raw. "I'm asking you to take a broken man who doesn't deserve you and let him try to be worthy of you anyway. I'm asking you to trust me when trust doesn't come easy for either of us." He took her hand, rough calluses against rough calluses, two people shaped by hard work and harder losses. "Magnolia Hartwell, will you marry me?" She should say no. She should protect him from the scandal, from the gossip, from tying himself to a woman the world had already decided wasn't worth loving. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "Yes." The word hung in the cold October air like a promise, like a prayer, like the first breath after almost drowning. Zeke's eyes closed and he pressed his forehead to hers, his whole body shaking with relief or emotion or both. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "Thank you." They married 3 days later in Zeke's cabin with only the circuit preacher as witness. The old man didn't ask questions about the speed or the circumstances. He'd seen enough frontier desperation to know when to keep his peace. He blessed their union with words about love, covering a multitude of sins and two becoming one flesh, then rode on to the next settlement, leaving them alone in the life they'd chosen. Magnolia stood in the middle of Zeke's cabin, her cabin now too, and tried to process that everything had changed in less than a month. She was married to a man she barely knew. She was living in a home that still held ghosts of his first wife. She was betting her entire future and her baby's future on the hope that this broken rancher would keep his promises. "Hey!" Zeke's hand on her shoulder made her jump. "You're thinking too loud." She turned to face him, and the gentleness in his expression nearly undid her. "I'm terrified I'll wake up and this will all be a dream, or worse, a mistake." "It's not a mistake." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Magnolia, I know this is fast. I know we're both scared. But I meant every word I said. You and this baby are mine now, and I protect what's mine. Even from the whole town, especially from the whole town." And then he kissed her, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. It wasn't the desperate passion of young lovers. It was something deeper, something that tasted like grief transformed into hope, like two shattered people finding a way to fit their broken pieces together. When he pulled back, Magnolia was crying openly, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of the overwhelming realization that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to be happy. That night they lay in bed, not touching yet, both too aware of the newness and fragility of this thing between them, and listened to the wind howl outside. "Zeke?" Magnolia whispered into the darkness. "Yeah? I'm glad you came to fix my fence that day." She felt rather than saw him smile. "Me too." But peace never lasted long in Coldwater Creek. 2 weeks after the wedding, Magnolia made the mistake of going into town. She'd put it off as long as possible, but winter was coming hard, and they needed supplies: flour, salt, lamp oil, medicine. Zeke had offered to go alone, but she'd refused. She was tired of hiding, tired of being afraid, tired of letting other people's cruelty dictate her life. So she put on her best dress, the one that no longer hid her growing belly, held her head high, and walked into Palmer's General Store like she had every right to be there. The silence that fell was immediate and suffocating. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every eye turned to stare. Mrs. Palmer stood behind the counter with her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval, while 3 other women clustered near the fabric display whispered behind their hands. Magnolia felt their judgment like physical weight, but she forced herself to move forward, to pick up a bag of flour, to pretend she didn't hear the words that followed her through the store. Shameless, that's what she is. Married barely 2 weeks and already showing. Poor Mr. Thornwood doesn't even realize he's been trapped. That baby's not his, everyone knows it. She seduced him with her witch ways. Magnolia's hands shook as she placed items on the counter. Mrs. Palmer rang them up with cold efficiency, making each movement feel like an accusation. "That'll be $3.40, she said, not meeting Magnolia's eyes. Magnolia counted out the money carefully, aware of how many eyes were watching, how many people were waiting for her to make a mistake. "Thank you," she said quietly, gathering her purchases. "Must be convenient," Mrs. Palmer said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "finding a new husband so quickly, especially for a woman in your condition." The words hit like a slap. Magnolia's face burned. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, to scream that Silas had been dead 4 months, and yes, this was his child. And no, she hadn't seduced Zeke or trapped him or used witch ways. She was just a woman trying to survive in a world that wanted her dead. But before she could speak, the door slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. Zeke stood in the doorway, his presence filling the entire store. His eyes swept the room, taking in the cruel faces, the judgment, the way his wife stood trembling at the counter. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Mrs. Palmer, I believe you have something to say to my wife." Mrs. Palmer paled. "Mr. Thornwood, you were just spreading poison about a woman who's done nothing to you." Zeke moved to stand beside Magnolia, his hand finding hers and gripping tight. "A woman who lost her husband and faced that grief alone while you gossiped instead of offering Christian charity." He turned to address the entire store, his jaw set like granite. "Now, I want everyone here to hear me clear. Magnolia is my wife. Her child is my child. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." "But Mr. Thornwood," one of the women near the fabric said, her voice dripping with false concern, "surely you realize the timeline." "I realize that my wife is carrying a child conceived in her first marriage. I realize that she's been treated with cruelty and judgment while trying to survive alone. And I realize that I love her and that baby more than I care about the opinions of small-minded people who have nothing better to do than tear down a grieving widow." His voice hardened. Now, here's what's going to happen. If I hear one more whisper, one more cruel word about Magnolia, that person will find their business no longer welcome at my ranch. And considering I buy more supplies in a month than most folks here do in a year, I suggest you think real careful about the cost of your judgment." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Palmer looked like she'd been slapped. The other women stared at their shoes. Nobody dared speak. "Come on," Zeke said gently to Magnolia, gathering her purchases. "We're going home." They walked out together into the cold November afternoon, and Magnolia couldn't stop the tears that poured down her face. Not tears of shame this time, but something else entirely. Zeke had stood up for her. In front of the whole town, he'd claimed her and the baby as his own, had risked his reputation and his business to defend her honor. Nobody had ever done that before. Nobody had ever chosen her over their own comfort. "Why are you crying?" Zeke asked, loading the supplies into the wagon, his voice tight with concern. "Did they hurt you? Did someone—" "No." Magnolia grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "No, you magnificent fool. I'm crying because you just sacrificed everything for me. You're standing in this town, your business relationships, everything you've built, and I don't understand why." Zeke's expression softened. He cupped her face in his rough hands, thumbs brushing away tears. "Because you're worth it. Because that baby is worth it. Because love means standing beside someone even when the whole world is against them." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Magnolia, I told you, you're not alone anymore. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever comes, we face it together." She kissed him then, right there in the middle of Main Street where anyone could see, where the gossips could add it to their list of scandals. She kissed him with everything she had, pouring 4 months of fear and grief and desperate hope into the press of her lips against his. When they broke apart, Zeke was smiling, actually smiling, something she'd never seen before, and it transformed his whole face. "Let's go home," he said. Home. The word settled into Magnolia's chest like a blessing. She had a home. She had a husband who loved her. She had a future that didn't end with her frozen body on a winter trail. The baby kicked, strong now, insistent, and she pressed Zeke's hand to her belly so he could feel it too. "There," she whispered. "Do you feel that?" Zeke's eyes widened, then filled with tears. That's our baby." "Our baby," Magnolia agreed, and saying it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. This child would have Zeke's name, his protection, his love. It would grow up knowing that family wasn't just about blood. It was about showing up, about choosing to stay, about love that fought through grief and fear to find hope on the other side. That night, in their cabin with snow beginning to fall outside, Zeke held Magnolia close by the fire. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "When Sarah died, I thought my life was over, thought I'd used up all my chances at happiness, but then you fell into my arms, literally fell, and everything changed. You gave me a reason to wake up, a reason to keep going, a reason to believe that maybe broken things can be put back together after all." "We're both broken," Magnolia said, her hand over his where it rested on her belly. "Maybe," Zeke agreed, "but maybe broken things fit together better. Maybe the cracks let the light through." Magnolia turned in his arms so she could see his face. "I love you, Zeke Thornwood. I don't know when it happened exactly, somewhere between you catching me and you defending me and you choosing me over your own comfort. But I love you." "I love you too," Zeke said and kissed her softly. "You and this baby. My family." Outside, the snow fell thick and silent, covering Coldwater Creek in white. Inside, 2 broken people held each other close and dared to believe in second chances. The baby kicked again, as if agreeing, as if saying, "Yes, this is where I'm meant to be. This is the family I was always supposed to have." And for the first time since Silas died, since she'd realized she was pregnant and alone, since she'd collapsed in that barn with a rancher's eyes on her secret, Magnolia Hartwell felt safe. She felt loved. She felt like maybe, despite everything, she was going to be okay. Because love, real love, wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up. It was about standing together when the world wanted you apart. It was about a lonely rancher and a giant widow finding each other in the dust and deciding that broken things deserved a second chance at beautiful. So tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you feeling this story? Drop your location below and let us know what touched your heart. And if you want more stories like this that'll make you cry, make you believe in love again, and keep you hooked until the very last second, hit that notification bell right now, because we've got more emotional, powerful stories coming your way, and you don't want to miss a single one. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's build this community together. Where are you watching from? Tell us now.